Hey, mindless lovers, welcome back. Today, I want to talk a little bit about this weird theory floating around the internet, attachment styles. You ever notice how suddenly everyone online has a diagnosis? Like, you can't scroll for 5 seconds without someone saying, "I'm anxious attached, that's why I text too much," or "he's definitely avoidant, classic sign." Look, it's very comforting to just cleanly label things, I get it. But love is confusing, rejection hurts, and if someone gives you a system that promises to explain all that, of course you're going to eat it up. These frameworks make everything feel clean, right? Like if you just figure out your type, you can finally stop ending up in the same emotional mess. If you're anxious, you just need a secure partner. If you're avoidant, you need to work on vulnerability. Problem solved. Except, not really. Because here's the thing. When you start believing those boxes too much, you stop seeing yourself as a person who can grow. You start seeing yourself as a type that has to be managed. And worse, you start seeing other people that way too. You meet someone new, and before you even get to know them, your brain's already typing their psychological resume. They take a while to reply, probably avoidant. Too affectionate, definitely anxious. It's like dating turned into emotional astrology. And yeah, it's kind of funny, but it's also quietly ruining how we connect. Because instead of actually feeling what's happening, we're analyzing it like we're writing a report on ourselves. And I get it. We all want control. Labels make life feel predictable. But the truth is, people aren't predictable. They're messy, inconsistent, weird, emotional, confusing. And that's what makes them worth knowing. So maybe this obsession with attachment styles isn't actually helping us understand love. Maybe it's just making us afraid to experience it without a manual. Anyway, that's what I want to unpack today. How these labels that sound smart and healing might actually be keeping us stuck. Because at the end of the day, you don't need to be securely attached to love well. You just need to be human enough to show up. Messy, awkward, curious, but real. All right, let's get into it. So why do we love these labels so much? Why do words like anxious or avoidant hit so hard, almost like they explain our entire love life? It's because labels make chaos feel manageable. They turn feelings, messy, unpredictable, emotional feelings, into something we can categorize. When you've had relationships that left you confused or hurt, hearing, "Oh, that's your attachment style," feels like instant relief. It gives pain a name. And when pain has a name, it feels smaller. It's not, "I don't know why I keep choosing people who hurt me." It's, "Oh, I have an anxious attachment style." That little shift feels good. Suddenly you're not lost. You're diagnosed. It makes love sound like a problem you can solve if you just study hard enough. But here's where it gets tricky. Once you start seeing everything through that lens, you start looking for proof of it everywhere. It's like you've stopped being in love and started being in research mode. You stop being curious about what's actually happening between two people and start seeing everything through your theory. You're no longer asking, "Why do I feel this way?" You're saying, "This is just my attachment pattern." You stop asking, "What's really going on with them?" You say, "They're clearly avoidant." You trade curiosity for certainty. And certainty is where love goes to die. Because love isn't supposed to be predictable. It's supposed to stretch you, confuse you, teach you. But if you already think you know the ending because of some psychological chart, you'll never let yourself be surprised. And here's something no one likes to admit. We cling to these systems because they give us a sense of safety, not just with others, but with ourselves. It's easier to say, "I behave this way because I'm anxious attached," than to say, "I'm scared." It's easier to say, "They're avoidant," than to say, "Maybe they just don't want me." The label protects your ego. It gives pain a structure, a reason. And that's fine, to a point. But if you live inside those words too long, you start mistaking the label for the truth.
And that's where it becomes dangerous. Because instead of asking, how can I grow? You start saying, that's just how I am. So yeah, attachment styles can give you a map, but they can also make you forget that you're allowed to take a different route. And if you keep clinging to that map, you'll miss the real journey that's happening right in front of you. All right, let's keep going. Because next, we've got to talk about how these labels slowly start trapping you without you even realizing it.
Here's where things get sneaky. Because once you start identifying with a label, it doesn't just describe you, it starts defining you. You go from saying, sometimes I get anxious in relationships, to I'm an anxious person. You go from I need space sometimes to I'm an avoidant type. And suddenly, that label becomes your identity. It's not something you experience, it's who you are. And that sounds harmless, but think about what it does. Every time you react a certain way, you confirm the label. You start playing a role. You catch yourself thinking, see, that's so me. I always do this. That's my attachment style showing up. And just like that, your behavior isn't a choice anymore. It's a script. You stop being curious about yourself because you think you've already got yourself figured out. It's comforting, but it's also limiting. Like, imagine someone tells you you're bad at public speaking. You'll probably believe it, and every time you get nervous before talking, you'll go, see, they were right. But what if you just practiced more, got better, and eventually enjoyed it? That's what labels stop you from doing. They make you forget that change is possible. The same thing happens emotionally. The label becomes a safety net for your behavior. Instead of asking why you're reacting a certain way, you just shrug and say, that's my attachment stuff. It feels like understanding, but really, it's avoidance disguised as insight. It's kind of like putting a Band-Aid on a leak. You cover it up, make it look neat, but the real issue's still underneath. And what's even more dangerous is how subtle it is. You might genuinely think you're growing because you can describe your patterns perfectly. You can talk about them for hours. You can analyze your childhood, your triggers, your past relationships, and yet the same cycle keeps repeating. That's because talking about pain isn't the same as healing it. Understanding your fear of rejection isn't the same as actually staying present when you feel rejected. Growth doesn't happen in your head. It happens in those uncomfortable moments where you don't follow the script. When you want to pull away, but you stay. When you want to chase, but you breathe instead. When you stop being anxious or avoidant and just let yourself be human, messy, scared, trying, learning. See, that's the irony. The more you hold on to these labels to protect yourself, the more trapped you become by them. Because now, every emotional reaction has to fit the pattern. Every relationship becomes a test you're either passing or failing. But love isn't a test. It's not about proving you're healed or secure. It's about being present, honest, and willing to see yourself clearly. So maybe the next time you catch yourself saying, I'm just avoidant, or I'm just anxious, pause and ask instead, okay, but what am I feeling right now? What's actually happening underneath that label? Because the second you start asking those questions, you step out of the script, and that's where real change begins.
So let's talk about real self-awareness. Not the Instagram version, not the I know all my patterns version, but the kind that actually helps you grow. Because here's the truth. Knowing the psychology of your behavior doesn't automatically make you self-aware. It just makes you informed. And being informed is not the same as being awake. Self-awareness is when you notice what's happening in real time, not when you analyze it later with perfect hindsight. Like when your partner doesn't text back for hours. Real self-awareness isn't thinking, oh, this is my anxious attachment acting up. It's realizing, okay, I'm starting to feel uneasy right now. I want reassurance. I feel scared. That's it. No label, no theory, just honesty. It's simple, but man, it's hard because our instinct is to explain our feelings, not feel them. We want to intellectualize what we can't control. We'd rather say, "This is my trauma response," than just admit, "I feel small right now." And yet, the second one sounds raw, it makes you feel exposed. But that's where the real awareness lives, right in that awkward space between reacting and naming. Because when you can notice your feelings without trying to fix or categorize them, you stop fighting yourself. You actually start to understand your emotions not as problems, but as messages. Fear isn't something wrong with you, it's your body saying, "I care about this." Jealousy isn't weakness, it's a sign you're craving security. You only learn that when you listen instead of label. And this isn't about ignoring your past or pretending trauma doesn't matter. Of course it does. It's about not letting those stories become your identity. The more you repeat, "I'm this type," the more your mind builds a cage around it. You stop seeing the edges of your behavior. You just live inside it. Real awareness is noticing those edges again. It's when you catch yourself mid-pattern and think, "Wait, do I actually need to react this way right now?" That's growth. That's freedom. Because at that point, you're not just running on autopilot anymore. You're choosing. You're not the anxious one or the avoidant one. You're just a person with emotions. And emotions are supposed to move. They're not meant to be frozen under a label. And here's something to think about. When you stop labeling your emotions, you actually start understanding other people's better too. You stop thinking in categories and start feeling in real connection. You notice tone, energy, the pauses, not just the story. And that's where empathy starts. So yeah, self-awareness isn't about memorizing your psychology. It's about noticing your humanity. Being aware without judgment, being curious without control. That's when you actually grow. And that's where the irony kicks in. When you stop trying so hard to fix your attachment style, you slowly start becoming more secure naturally. Not because you earned it, but because you finally stopped fighting yourself. All right, let's talk about something that sounds deep, but quietly keeps people stuck. That whole "I'm healing" phase. And why sometimes it's just another disguise for staying exactly the same.
All right, let's talk about a phrase we hear way too often. I'm healing. Sounds nice, right? Peaceful, grounded, mature. Except sometimes it's complete bullshit. Not because people aren't trying to grow, they are, but because a lot of what we call healing is just a prettier form of avoidance. You know the phase. You're watching videos about attachment theory, you're reading books about emotional regulation, you've got your favorite therapist on TikTok. You're journaling, meditating, setting boundaries, all the good stuff. And it feels amazing. You're like, wow, I'm doing the work. But here's the tricky part. If you look closely, you might realize that nothing inside you is actually changing. You're just better at talking about your problems now. You've swapped emotional chaos for psychological vocabulary. I'm a big fan of Jiddu Krishnamurti, and he once said, "It's like we're rearranging the furniture in our minds, but never stepping outside the house. We keep polishing the walls of the prison instead of walking out." You still get triggered, still chase the same type of partner, still replay the same patterns. That's the illusion of healing. It makes you sound evolved while keeping you in the exact same spot. And it's sneaky because you can convince yourself you're growing. I'm so aware now. I understand my trauma. Cool. But can you stay calm when someone pulls away? Can you stay open when things feel uncertain? That's healing. Not just knowing the theory, but living through the discomfort without labeling yourself to death. Here's the thing. Growth doesn't happen in your head. It happens in those moments when your nervous system wants to run, but you stay. When your mind says, "Don't trust this," but your heart says, "It's okay." That's healing. But the internet has turned healing into a personality. People start identifying as healing the same way they identify as anxious or avoidant. It becomes another role to play. You're not just a person anymore, you're a project. And projects are never done, which means you'll always find something else that's unhealed. It's an endless loop of self-improvement that keeps you looking inward instead of living outward. And don't get me wrong, reflection is important, but you can't heal in theory. You can only heal in life. You can only test your emotional growth in real connection, not in your notes app. You have to get hurt again. You have to get uncomfortable again. Healing isn't an aesthetic. It's a process of letting yourself be human again. And that's messy. So if you're someone who says, I'm healing, that's beautiful. But don't let it become your new identity. Because the moment you start identifying as the person who's healing, you'll unconsciously resist ever feeling healed. You'll keep looping through the same stories because deep down, you're more comfortable in the struggle than in peace. And that's not your fault. Healing isn't about endlessly working on yourself. Maybe it's about knowing when to stop digging, stop labeling, stop fixing, and just live. All right, let's take this energy into something even bigger. How all this labeling and healing stuff doesn't just affect how we see ourselves, but how we start seeing other people. And spoiler, that's where things really start to fall apart.
All right, so we've talked about how labels mess with how we see ourselves. Now, let's talk about how they mess with how we see other people. Because, man, this is where things really go sideways. Once you start seeing yourself through a label, you start seeing everyone through one too. And suddenly, dating turns into emotional data analysis. You're not meeting a person anymore, you're scanning for attachment patterns. He takes forever to reply, definitely avoidant. She wants to hang out twice in a row, anxious. Someone opens up about their feelings and you're like, wow, secure much? You're not connecting, you're diagnosing. But the more we use them, the less empathy we actually have. Because instead of seeing the human being in front of us, we see a case study. It's like we've all become amateur therapists who forgot how to be people. You stop listening to what they're actually saying because you're too busy trying to fit them into a category. And when you do that, you stop being curious. You stop learning who they are. Someone gets quiet, and instead of asking, hey, are you okay? You tell yourself, yep, avoidant behavior. And now you've written their entire emotional story without ever hearing them out. That's what labels do. They turn people into patterns. And when you turn people into patterns, you stop being surprised by them. You stop being open to who they might really be. When you rely too much on psychological frameworks, you forget that people can surprise you. You forget the connection doesn't happen because someone matches your ideal type. It happens because something about them feels alive, real, familiar in a way you can't explain. But we've gotten so addicted to emotional theories that we treat people like algorithms. We start filtering potential partners by their trauma response instead of their character. And that's wild, right? Like, sorry, you seem great, but my nervous system says we're incompatible. That's not healing. That's fear dressed up as emotional intelligence. Because if you always approach love like a psychology experiment, you'll never experience it for what it actually is, a human experience, not a study. People aren't lab rats. They're not their attachment type. They're just trying to figure it out, same as you. And if we could just drop the analysis for a second and meet people where they are, without assumptions, without theories, without the charts and frameworks, we'd probably have deeper connections than half the emotionally aware people out there. Because here's the truth, the most emotionally intelligent thing you can do isn't labeling someone's behavior. It's listening to their story. It's being present enough to say, I see you, instead of, I've studied your type. And when you start doing that, you stop looking for the right kind of person, and you start noticing the real kind of connection. So maybe the next time someone's a little distant or a little clingy, don't pull out the attachment manual. Just stay curious. Ask questions. Be human. Because that's where love actually happens.
Not in the patterns, but in the pauses.
All right, so let's talk about what happens when you drop all the labels. When you stop calling yourself anxious, avoidant, secure, whatever, and you just show up. Because that's where real connection starts. When you let go of the mental checklist, the one that says they need to text me this much or they shouldn't be too clingy, you finally start seeing the person in front of you. You stop comparing them to your ex, to your therapist's advice, to your favorite podcast episode. You just meet them. And that's a lot rarer than we realize. Most of us don't really meet people. We meet our projections of them. We meet the version our fears and expectations build. But when you drop all that and stay open, really open, something changes. You start hearing not just what they say, but how they say it. You notice small things, their pauses, their tone, the way they look at you when they're unsure. You start connecting with their humanity, not their pattern. And that's when relationships stop feeling like work and start feeling like life. Because now you're not performing your attachment style anymore. You're just responding honestly to what's happening. If someone's distant, you don't instantly spiral. You stay curious. Maybe ask what's going on. If someone's really affectionate, you don't assume they're anxious. You just take in the care and decide if it feels good to you. It's not about being secure. It's about being real. And here's the wild part. When you're real, you actually become more secure naturally. Not because you mastered some technique, but because you're finally grounded in truth. You're not fighting your emotions, you're listening to them. You're not reading people, you're understanding them. You're not trying to predict love, you're actually living it. That's what genuine connection looks like. It's not perfect, it's not always calm. Sometimes it's awkward. Sometimes it's vulnerable as hell. But it's honest. And honesty is what makes love last. Think about it. The people you felt closest to in life, they weren't perfect communicators or emotionally flawless. They were just there. Open, imperfect, present. That's what makes someone feel safe, not the label secure, but the energy of someone who's real enough to admit when they're scared and brave enough to keep showing up anyway. Because that's love in its rawest form, not the kind you study, but the kind you experience. The kind that teaches you things that no book, no video, no attachment framework ever could. And once you've felt that kind of connection, you'll realize how small those labels really were. They were just words trying to describe something you can only feel. So maybe the goal isn't to become a secure partner. Maybe it's just to become a truthful one. Someone who can say, I get scared sometimes. Or, I pull away when I care too much, without shame. Because you're not hiding behind a theory anymore. You're not trying to be the healed version of yourself. You're just being the honest one. And funny enough, that honesty, that presence, that's what real emotional security actually looks like.
All right, so we've looked at how labels can trap us, how they shape our reactions, and how they quietly take over our relationships. Now let's talk about what actually helps. Not a theory, not a new system, just something radically simple. Being here. Because the truth is, you don't change your patterns by thinking about them. You change them when you notice the moment they appear. There's a line often shared in spiritual circles. What you observe, you are no longer controlled by. No complicated explanation, just that. So imagine you're sitting there, waiting for a reply. That sinking feeling creeps in. Your mind starts writing the old script. They're losing interest. This is happening again. Before you even react, just notice. That tiny pause is everything. Presence doesn't mean you magically feel calm. It just means you're aware enough to choose what comes next.
You're not automatically chasing or shutting down or pretending you don't care. You're responding from awareness, not fear. Krishnamurti once asked, can you look at a feeling without naming it? Because the moment you name it, anxious, avoidant, insecure, you turn it into a problem to fix. But if you just look at it without judgment, you'll notice something surprising. It moves. It comes and goes like a wave. Fear isn't permanent. Jealousy isn't your personality. They're just experiences passing through. You don't need to fix your attachment style. You just need to sit with yourself long enough to see that you're more than the patterns you learned. And when you do that, even once, something shifts. Your reactions soften. You become less defensive, more open. You start giving others the same space you're giving yourself. Connection becomes real again. Less performance, more presence. Two humans, not two labels, meeting in the truth of the moment. This is what growth actually looks like. Not becoming secure, but becoming aware enough to choose love even when fear shows up. It's not perfect. Sometimes you'll still spiral. Sometimes you'll still pull away. But now you'll notice it. And that noticing, that's healing in real time. Buddhist wisdom says the root of suffering is clinging. When we cling to labels, identities, and psychological stories, our relationships become battles inside the mind. But when we loosen the grip, even a little, something beautiful happens. Presence replaces protection. You don't need to be fearless to love. You just need to be honest about the fear and gentle with the person feeling it, yourself. So maybe the goal isn't to master love or diagnose it. Maybe it's just to show up, aware, imperfect, and willing. Because love doesn't need a label. It needs a moment. And that moment is always right here. Thanks for sticking around. Take a breath. You're doing more healing than you think.